Now, it's been a very busy news week, and not just here in Africa. This week saw the resumption of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry here at home, which heard damning evidence of how a Durban businessman fleeced the South African Police Service in KwaZulu-Natal of hundreds of thousands of rands. And Professor Malegapuru Makgoba was announced as the new interim chairperson of embattled power utility Eskom, and thousands of children started the 2020 academic school year on Wednesday. Internationally, the impeachment trial of US President Donald Trump officially started, and the entire Russian government resigned. And in the UK, Prince Harry and his wife announced that they were stepping back as senior royals, and there was a meeting with the Queen earlier this week. Political analyst Jamie Mighti is here to take us through the news and some of the headlines, and we'll focus on the international stories. Thanks for coming through once again, Jamie. Let's start with Russia. So you have a Medvedev and his cabinet, that government resigning in the Duma. Let's talk about that. What's going on here? Because Medvedev and Putin are supposed to be close buddies. They're supposed to be allies. They've been seen as such for a very long time. Is there a rift happening there?
Well, I think it's too soon to be able to tell whether there's a tension between the two of them, because they appeared jointly in that announcement that came after the State of the Nation address, because basically Putin said there needs to be a restructuring of the parliament to give it more power. And then shortly thereafter, Dmitry, the prime minister, the former prime minister, came to announce that they were all resigning to allow the president to facilitate this constitutional amendment. And then Putin then thanked him and said he's done a good job, not nearly as well as they could have, but he said, you know, nothing can be perfect. And then now he's going to move to being his deputy in the Security Council that Putin is in charge of. So Dmitry is still going to be very close in Putin's nexus. The real issue seems to be that Putin is actually preparing the public for the end of his presidential term. And he has created 3 different pathways for him to retain serious political control. One is if Parliament is given more power and then he comes into Parliament as Speaker, that therefore effectively means that he's still the power broker in Russian politics, and then the presidency loses some of its oxygen. Alternatively, he can restructure the state security apparatus to give him more power there, or you could restructure the provincial structures where you could then become the head of the provincial structures. Basically, he has created 3 different pathways, and part of the reason why he's doing that is because it's a sophisticated chess move. If there are 3 different alternative routes for him to secure power, it then becomes very difficult for rivals and opposition leaders to pin him down on one. And then he can proceed through the next 3 years till 2024, when the elections really go in, and tactically land the plane of where he's going to be, because the Russian constitution prohibits consecutive 2 terms being served by leaders. So he can still theoretically come back in 2029 again as the president. And Putin has been playing this game quite effectively, where he shifts the musical chairs of power so that they synchronize with his particular political movements, so that he is always the de facto ruler of Russia. And it does seem like there isn't real pushback within the power structures of his own party. He's still very much in charge. And Russia is still showing that they are globally dominant, because they were brokering peace talks with Libya, you know, trying to get the 2 different sides together, showing once again that they are a major player in the region, over America, over NATO, over the EU. So it doesn't look like Putin is going anywhere. This is just him very early taking control of what happens in the future.
That certainly seems to be the case, because if you think about what's happening here, and as you say, Putin very secure in where he is right now, and making sure that he'll still be secure post 2024 in the sort of moves that he is brokering. But you say he's very secure within his party, within the government structures, but we did see some protests last year from the Russian public, some of the biggest protests that he's had during his presidency as Vladimir Putin. And one of the things that the public were asking for were, new faces, fresh blood in Russian politics. And is this where Medvedev is perhaps going to draw the short end, the short stick, as it were, because Mikhail Mishustin is being touted to be the next prime minister.
So I think this is Putin almost responding to that need for new faces. You see, Dmitry basically has taken a lot of the flack for some of the challenges the government has been facing.
Because he's in charge of the internal.
Exactly. Whereas Putin has been seen as the global leader who's doing a good job. In fact, some people were saying that Putin actually needs to take over the economy again so that everything can get in order. So he's clearly playing this game where he gets a new fall guy to take the political heat while he continues to perform in the roles where he's seen as the strong guy, the guy who's outsmarting America, NATO, the EU, and possibly even China. So it's part of the game of managing his own reputation and responding to some of these appeals from the younger generation that, listen, we're getting tired of the same old faces. So he's very sensitive to the criticism that does come from the street level. But he does seem to be quite sophisticated in handling the political affairs and, in fact, even dealing with opposition, which does emerge with a strong voice. So it's very clearly Putin's show in Russia.
Indeed. Let's move quickly over to the United States. The impeachment trial, of course, that's the big one.
Yeah.
And let's look at the developments thus far and what's being said. You look at Donald Trump's lawyer and people are saying, but should be the witness. So what's happening there?
So there's Lev Panas, who came up yesterday and really said that he's got two bits of information that are important. That Trump was very involved in the firing of the Ukraine ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, who was really reluctant to execute this quid pro quo arrangement and has been very vocal in criticizing Trump. And then he also said that Trump actually knew way more than he's currently been saying. So that's what Lev Panas has been alleging. The challenge with him is that he was arrested when he was trying to flee the U.S. last year because he was indicted on charges of conspiracy, making false statements, and falsification of records, all of which were related to campaign finance allegations. So some of the critics are saying, listen, this is just a guy trying to get out of jail, and he's trying to use whatever proximity he had to Trump at the time to get his get out of jail free card. I think also Trump has been denying that he knew this guy well, although pictures have been showing up. So Trump's version on the issues is not one that's very credible. But if we draw away from this question of the witnesses and we look at the bigger picture, an impeachment process, for it to really be a landed plane, for you to remove the leader, you need that supermajority of 67 votes and not just a simple majority. And it doesn't look like the Republicans are going to break rank, even if witnesses are allowed. This witness has already shown that there will be credible challenges to their version being undercut, because the credibility of a witness is important in any trial. So if all of a sudden you have shown yourself to have falsified document, to have lied, to have been involved in campaign finance, basically pilfering, and also you were trying to flee America, you're not really going to come off to the American public as, the squeakiest and cleanest witness. So that's one already. But there's also the partisan nature of this particular process from the very beginning makes it very much like the Bill Clinton impeachment process, because everyone is voting on party lines. And when you vote on party lines, even if you get all of the dirt on Trump that you can and present it in the trial process, both sides will go back to their bases and be able to preach to the choir. But what then happens is that the people in the middle aren't necessarily shifted one way or another, and it becomes a very messy process where you've got 90% of Democrats supporting the impeachment and 90% of Republicans opposing the impeachment. And that speaks to the divide that currently exists in America. The person who benefits the most from divided America is Donald Trump. He knows best how to navigate the waters of hate, xenophobia, and division. And he's proven that thus far. And if it plays out exactly along partisan lines, with maybe 3 or 4 Republican senators shifting because they are facing very tricky races, it's not really going to change the political dynamics, which is what a lot of critics of this whole process were saying, is that if it's a foregone conclusion that the Democrats will get their smear on Trump, but the Republicans will defend him, and Trump will say it's a witch hunt, and you guys will say, it's for the interest of justice, but both sides are only speaking to their corners, it could actually eventually hurt the Democrats more than it hurts Trump. And the case study for that is the elections in Britain, where Jeremy Corbyn gave in to the far left side of his party and was projecting all of his messaging only to them and not to the people who were maybe a little bit more concerned, still on the left, but concerned about the demands of the far left as being a little bit too radical, a little bit too, nouveau for the audience. This is where the Democrats could find themselves. And this impeachment process could play into that, because a lot of America isn't quite where the woke left is in terms of their political thinking globally and locally.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there into news time already. But thank you so much to political analyst Jamie Mighti talking to us about some of the international news headlines from this week. It's time now for News with Leanne.